Well, what's the verdict?
Oh, my reverser linkage is bent. Just my luck, it happened right before the new pilot gets here. Thanks for pitching in, Duck.
No worries. My train's delayed anyway. Say, what type of engine is the new pilot? That had better not be who I think it is. Oh, good. You're not.
Oh, excellent. Who exactly am I not?
Not important. I'm Duck, and this here is Rosie.
Welcome to Tidmouth, newbie. I'd show you around, but I seem to have lost my puff.
Oh no, that sounds serious. Don't worry, I'll help you find it.
Now, hang on.
He seems nice.
The British Railways Class 8 diesel was, to say the least, a very successful locomotive. Nearly 1,000 were built over a period of 10 years, and many remain in active use in railway yards, industrial spurs, and heritage lines to this day. It should be no surprise that several characters in Thomas & Friends were based on it. Paxton is one of these. Initially little more than a generic goon for Day of the Diesels, he'd very quickly evolve into a good-natured, diligent, if somewhat dim type, come the Brenner era. He was a welcome change from the generic bully Diesels we were used to, and his unstoppable optimism and ability to see the good in everyone was the perfect foil to Diesel's anger and scheming. He's the Homestar runner to Diesel's strong bad, if you will. He feels a lot closer to something Wilbert or Christopher Awdry would have come up with than a lot of his contemporaries. As I'm partial to adapting TV characters into the styles of the Railway series, bringing in Paxton was a no-brainer. I just need to flesh out his origins and purpose a little more. The Class 8 was so long-lived that I could have placed him almost anywhere in the timeline, but I chose to tie him into my headcanon for Rosie. As I've stated previously, she took over from Duck as station pilot at Tidmouth in 1967, but in 1974 was sent to assist on the extension of the Farker branch to Ulfstead. While the Fat Controller was committed to keeping the steam engines running, he couldn't deny that diesels had their merits. The railway had acquired 11 of them for both the main line and branch lines, but the real advantage would be using one to shunt trains at the big station. It would be cost-effective, flexible, address complaints from the city council about noise and smoke, and be less likely to explode because some bloke didn't have his morning coffee at 4 a.m. And on recommendation from some of the other engines, the Fat Controller bought one who had been working at Barrow in Furness for some time. A friendly Class 8 numbered 08910. 08910 was a real Class 8 assigned to Barrow in Furness between 1968 and 1974. At which point it was reallocated to Carlisle Kingmore. Of course, in this universe, he would instead come to Tidmouth, and he would gain the name Paxton. This is Keeper of Toast from the edit here. I think Accurascale has been spying on me because it turns out they are making 08910 in their 00 range. Yeah. Coincidence or conspiracy? You decide. Now, there is no Class 8 available in HO scale. There is, however, something reasonably close. The Class 11 diesel, a precursor to the 8, was adapted by English Electric for the Nederlandse
Spoorwegen.
Classified as Type 500 and 600. And it so happens that Roco produced this engine in their HO range back in the 80s. Making the 500 back into something British has been a popular conversion in the British HO community for years, and I managed to get one some time ago to potentially do it myself. My initial plan was to modify the existing body shell to more closely resemble an 08 than an 11, by cutting off these boxes on the side and replacing them with a 3D print. But as I looked closer at images of the Class 8, I began noticing more and more differences between the two. For example, their cabs. The 11's cab roof has a more shallow curve, while the 08's is more pronounced. The 08's cab doors and windows are also mounted lower, and the windows on the front have a different shape that follows this slope here. The front buffer beam is too wide, the buffers themselves aren't shaped correctly, and to top it all off, the innards of this engine are accessed via a very obnoxious screw atop the body. All these convinced me that rather than modding the existing body, it would be best to just 3D print a new one. And so I began the 3D modeling process using the plastic body to help me where it was accurate. The Class 8s had many variations, but I was fortunately able to find a few images of 08910 to help me figure out which to add to it. This includes this extra box on the left side where 2 of the vents would go, as well as extra panels over the engine access doors whose only purpose seems to be covering the rivets on the hinges. I made some interesting discoveries about the 08s in my research. Firstly, their sides are sloped, not straight up and down. Another is that the 08s had their front ladders removed by the time TOPS was implemented. I presume this was a health and safety thing to keep shunters from falling off them and breaking their bones, but honestly, they look so naked without them, so my headcanon is that the NWR added the ladders back on when they repainted Paxton, if for no other reason than the sake of utility. The hood and cab were printed separately until I finally had a print where the ladder stanchions didn't break off. Printing it this way allowed me to save the details on the back of the cab. Like Thomas though, he wouldn't have any way to keep his body on securely. In my defense, there was no way I was going to have that ugly screw on top, or frankly, even get the screw hole aligned correctly. From here, I drilled out the holes for all the handrails. This was way too tedious of a process, and some of these handrails are too close together for comfort while drilling, but it works. The handrails are bent from 0.4mm brass wire. I measured the length between the holes and marked the blanks I cut as such before bending them with needle nose pliers. The handles for all the access panels were tedious but easy. The top handrail on the sides needed to have additional stanchions soldered to a main piece at the right distance from each other. As for the handrails on the front, I couldn't really get these done quite right. In hindsight, I probably could have printed most of these on the model, but I was too afraid of them breaking off or not forming correctly. I already had that happen several times with the stanchions for the ladders. Unlike the folks at 40s, I am not an actual wizard. The wire does look a bit chunky, but it is what it is. I may revise this to have printed on handrails in the future, but that will be a question for another day. Now let's take a break from the body for a while and talk about the chassis. The chassis needed a fair bit done to bring it up to snuff. The front buffer beam had to be narrowed slightly, so I used a number 11 blade to score it repeatedly and remove the excess, then filed it smooth. These additional boards under the cab were also filed flush. The buffer beams have molded coupling hooks, or I should say nubs, so I had to cut these off and drill a 1.4mm hole for the Hornby R7200 couplers I use. Inconveniently, I did not, at the time, possess a pin vise that can hold a 1.4mm drill bit. There are handrails on the front steps of the 08 that would be very fine in model form. On the Roco chassis, these are represented by a molded slab. These two would be cut off and filed away. This was a bit annoying due to the lack of wiggle room, but I managed to remove enough plastic to add in a bent piece of wire. Now, if you look at the front of a Class 8, you'll see what I believe to be tanks for the air brakes, but I could be wrong about that. To represent these on Paxton, I cut some styrene tube to length, covered their ends with a sheet, and glued them to a styrene strip to act as a bracket. To fit them on the chassis, I had to cut off the clips that held in the old couplers, and then they could be secured with plastic cement. Air and vacuum hoses were added by cutting my standard 3D printed ones and gluing them on upside down. With most of these additions in place, the frames received a coat of Vallejo NATO Black from the airbrush. The buffer beams were repainted by hand with Tamiya XF7 Flat Red, as were the side rods and crank pins. I couldn't help myself, red rods look so good. I finally glued on the handrails for the front steps, and then sealed it in with a satin top coat. Paxton's TV series livery is a deep green with two big yellow stripes along his side and up right behind his radiator. I really like this livery. but I wasn't sure if it would fit with my version of the Northwestern Railway. In order to keep some semblance of realism, all engines on my railway must wear one of a set of standardized liveries, so I wanted to simplify this to be more in line with Daisy and what Boko and Bear will eventually look like. I had intended to use Reaper Viper Green, as I had done with Percy and Daisy. However, I felt it was just a bit too bright of a shade for a character like Paxton. I ultimately decided to replicate the TV livery and use Tamiya TS9 British Green, as I had used for Duck. It made for a far nicer contrast with the yellow stripes than the brighter Viper Green would have. However, I royally messed up on the order of color application. You see, the easiest way to do stripes and other trims is to do a coat of the color of said stripes or trims, apply some masking tape over that, and then apply your main coat. Unfortunately, I forgot to do this and went straight to my green. Not wanting to start over with a new print, I used some waterslide lining from Fox Transfers to mark the boundaries of the stripes, and then I painted in the middle by hand. It did the job, but it's not a very even finish, and you can see it spilling over in a couple of places. Now, Tamiya's paints are very good, but their yellow really doesn't cooperate with brushes, at least in my experience. The back of the cab was painted full yellow, and after receiving a second glossed clear coat, I used some leftover hazard stripe decals from when I made Mavis. They didn't quite adhere like I'd hoped initially, but the final satin coat seems to have kicked their asses and put them in line.
Stand on the point, maggots!
The number 12 is in the Gill Sans font from Fox Transfers. Why 12? Well, in my quest to flesh out the NWR's roster to the over 80 locomotives claimed in reading between the lines, that's just where he landed. And now that it's on a model, I think it's as good as cemented now. And finally, all of this was sealed in with Vallejo's satin varnish. Now, in order to run Paxton on DCC, I had to isolate the motor from the pickups, meaning these two tabs had to go. I could then solder the leads on the decoder to their appropriate connections. In this case, I've used a TCS M1 and KA4 Stay Alive. Now, TCS does have decoders with built-in Stay Alives, one of which I actually used on my Duck, but unfortunately there wasn't enough space in here for one of those. In Paxton for one of those. In order to fit faces, I left a big hole where the radiator grill should go. Over the past couple of years, I've slowly been getting better at modeling faces for engines, and since options for printable Paxton faces would be, shall we say, limited, I figured I would do the same for him. Quite fortunately, Paxton's model sheet is available on the Thomas Wiki, and it has an orthographic view of his face from 2 angles. This was a godsend. For the sake of the video, I made a few more expressions than just, huh. And you know, I think they're alright. Between this and Peter Sam, I think I'm getting the hang of this face thing. It helps when you have reference material on more than one dimension. For its age, this chassis runs as smooth as butter. It doesn't give you a perfect crawl, but it does run very well at slow speeds. You know, seeing as how most of my engines are small shunters, I kind of want to build a micro layout just so I can have them run and do some shunting. I don't know, I just kind of want an excuse to run Paxton. Now believe it or not, Pico, that's the German Pico, not the English Pico, is actually releasing a new tooling of the NS500. I may pick up a few and adapt my 08 body to fit, or even just retrofit them into 11s. I would love to do the Ironworks twins if I could. I've actually reimagined them as Class 11s so that they could go into industrial use and terrorize the steam engines just a little bit earlier. That's all for this episode, though. Paxton's been a delight to make, but I need a break. I don't know exactly when I'll make another locomotive. Right now, I'm not able to acquire many of the components I need for most of the models I've had planned. For now, I'm going to focus on making rolling stock and narrow gauge. When I do get back to making locomotives, I may try my hand at making a mainline diesel like Bear. I've also had some ideas for some of the pre-Northwestern locomotives cooking since before the major reveals we've gotten in the last year. I also recognize that my older models are desperately in need of a do-over, so when I can, I'll definitely be doing some of those. Only time will tell, though. I'd like to give a special thanks to my patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to support what I do and get perks like early access to videos and exclusive videos and printable models, you can join through the link in the description. Anyway, that's all for now. I'll see y'all at the next station.